Okay, hi everyone. If I could just interrupt your lovely conversations that are happening on your tables, I'd love to kick off the evening. So my name is Jennifer Karras, and I am the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, and I am really thrilled to be here tonight to introduce an amazing evening of conversations across the disciplines and taking a multilingual perspective. There are two things I love about the writing program. Three. I love the faculty, so that's first. But second, always amazing food choices, right? We'd never have to succumb to like another dreadful Sodexo brown bag, or God forbid that weird machine that makes the hamburgers. So thank you for the tacos. I think that's really fabulous. So that was one, two, and then the third thing that I love about the writing program is that they're like a virus. In every way, they're looking to infiltrate and advance the culture of writing on campus. I mean, that's not an easy. To change a culture is a really big deal. It's really hard to do. It takes a lot of painstaking, careful work. But the writing program has done that, and they do it in programs like this. Getting folks together, gathering around a table, sometimes with food, but really to engage in the kinds of inquiry, asking the kinds of questions that we should be doing at the university. So I'm thankful to the program for doing this. I'm thankful very much to my colleague Camilla Kenyon, who every year can find engaging faculty and pull them around the table and really get us started on smart and important conversations. So I want to welcome you all. I want to thank our faculty. I want to thank our esteemed panel members, and to say that I'm really excited to be here to learn and to engage in the conversation. And I know that you students are as well. I can tell just by looking at you right now, you're very excited about engaging. Last year at this very event, I was stunned and amazed at the level and the quality of questions that came from the students. So the bar is high. So I'm looking for some really thoughtful questions at the close of the panel. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Kenyon.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of you to Conversations in the Disciplines. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the tacos. So I'm Camilla Kenyon from the DU Writing Program, and I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Sheila Carter-Todd, Amanda Thompson, and Richard Colby for all of their work helping to make this event possible, as well as my colleagues in the writing program. We have been hosting this event for over 15 years. We find that it's a great way to find out about the research and writing that faculty across campus are doing. And if you're here for a research writing class, this event supports the work that you're doing in your classes, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, text-based interpretive, or mixed methods research. We usually have themes every year, and this year's theme is Multilingual Perspectives. All of our researchers are multilingual and use more than one language to do their research and writing. So I'd like to introduce our three presenters. We're going to hear first from Dr. Polina Dymova, who is a comparatist specializing in Russian, German, and British literature, culture, and art, including music. She is herself a musician, violinist, and a composer, and she is originally from Bulgaria. She has a forthcoming book, The Crossroads of the Senses, which examines modernist engagement with synesthesia. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Esteban Gomez from the Department of Anthropology. He works with visual ethnography and is also a curator. And he is going to be talking about documenting marginalized histories. He has done archaeological research in El Salvador, visual ethnography research with high school students in Denver, and he's also a screenwriter. His film that he's producing, Snapshots of Confinement, will air on PBS next month, and there's actually going to be a screening that he's going to announce that's next week here at DU, so I hope some of you will be able to make it. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Abigail Kabandula from the Korbel School of International Studies. She's the director of the Africa Center, and just next month they're going to be hosting a conference in sustainable development, so that's something to look out for. Her research focuses on global governance and human security in the African context, and she's going to speak about a recent project about the United Nations and the African Union's special political missions. So we're going to have all three talks and then have questions afterwards, so make sure you remember your questions. And right now, if you would just join me in welcoming Dr. Paulina Demova. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to Camilla Kinian for putting this wonderful multilingual panel together. And I will begin. I will talk about my first book, The Crossroads of the Senses, and I will try to say how I've used the languages I speak, Russian, German, English of course, and my native Bulgarian in my research, as well as how I also draw on music and the visual arts in my research. Oh yes, and since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I'm also studying Ukrainian. I felt that I should say that before I proceed. As a literature researcher, I use text-based interpretive methods, and I work with many texts that have not been translated into English. So I often need to translate Russian poems, for instance, related to my research in my articles. When it comes to multilingualism, however, language for me is not enough, and I think of multilingualism in ways that transcend language. So I investigate how we experience the world through our senses, how we experience nature, art, music, and how we can translate our sensory experiences into language. And I finally ask, how do culture and history shape our experiences or our senses? For my book, I searched for a research topic that would combine both my interest in literature and the senses and in music and art, since the arts, I argue, have their own language. And as Camilla nicely pointed out, I'm a semi-professional violinist, so I love music. So I knew from the start that I wanted to write on multimedia experiments in modern art, for instance, in theater, opera, or film. But I also kept asking the question, what motivated these experiments across the arts in modernism? And I found the answer to this question in the way that literature and the arts can appeal to the senses, and in particular in the experience of synesthesia as the blending of sounds, colors, shapes, and scents. And I will define synesthesia in a second in more detail. So in my book, I work with several languages as well as several arts to write a history of the mixed senses around 1900. And I still haven't decided on the cover design for the book, so these are two possibilities. If anyone has a preference, let me know. I appreciate input. I just got them yesterday. So my book title is The Crossroads of the Senses, the synesthetic metaphor across the arts in European modernism. The book first follows the intellectual history of synesthesia or color hearing. So synesthesia is the genuine or artistic experience of seeing colors when listening to music, or seeing letters and numbers in color. So if you read the text, you may see the floating colors of the different letters over the text itself. I next focus on how modernist multimedia artists use synesthesia in their works. For instance, Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky evolved the sounds of musical instruments in his paintings, whereas Irish writer Oscar Wilde, that you may know from the picture of Dorian Gray, for instance, saw Hungarian music as mauve and Dvorak's works as scarlet. I thus investigate how synesthesia as an experience inspired the flourishing exchanges among the arts around 1900. I argue in the book that synesthesia in poetry, painting, and music anticipated adaptations across the modernist arts. And I will show you also today how synesthesia continues to inspire multimedia experiments in the 21st century. So today I will reflect on a presentation that I gave in 2019 in Moscow for the International Synesthesia Symposium there. That was the last time I was able to make it to Moscow because of COVID and then because of the war in Ukraine. So in my slides for this conference, I had both English and Russian, and I decided to keep the Russian so that you see what I was trying to do. For my audiences, I was hoping to reach Russian scholars and artists working with synesthesia and to speak to new audiences of Russian synesthetes. And again, like when I say Russian synesthetes, some of you may know that you're synesthetes. If you are, tell me. But there are people who actually experience this. This is not just a metaphor, which is, again, like part of my book is the metaphorical side. So I'll define synesthesia first based on recent scientific criteria, note ways to go beyond them, and then discuss one particular multilingual, multisensory example. So, but what exactly is synesthesia? So synesthesia I define as the figurative or physiological mixing of the senses, for instance, in the experience of sound as color. Genuine or true synesthetes may perceive the sound of the violins as silver blue and the flutes as bright yellow or lime green. Neuroscientists define genuine synesthesia as highly individual, automatic, and consistent cross-sensory response to stimuli. So this means that if one person thinks that the letter A or the vowel A is red and then E is lime green or malachite green, they're going to believe that for the rest of their lives. So there are no changes there. It is also an emotional, memorable, and meaningful meaningful experience. Synesthetic images are also generic and abstract in appearance, like circles, stars, wavy lines, and grids that you see on the right side. Such images were called in 1926 form constants by a German scholar, and they could be projected into space, so synesthetes may see the flickering lights or stars or circles in front of them, or they can see them in their mind's eye. But similar images can be also perceived while falling asleep, in near-death experiences, in drug-induced hallucinations, and in meditation. As we see them, for instance, in Annie Besant's mystical drawing of the colorful abstract shapes of music on the left. So then, is synesthesia only a neurological, highly individual phenomenon? Could we open up ways of thinking about synesthesia as an artistic and cultural phenomenon? So artists have hoped to uncover a universal language of colors, sounds, and shapes and their correspondences, and some cultures have established traditions of multisensory associations. Cambodian queens wear, for instance, different colors on each day of the week, and color to day of the week correspondences are also a type of synesthesia. The quipus of the Andean indigenous people represent numbers with specific colors. So this is number to color synesthesia. But neuroscientists tend to discount artistic and cultural synesthesia as pseudosynesthesia because it is not individual but universal and shared. But let's take a look at the images on the screen. And now I hope everyone has the questionnaire because I'll ask you to mark one answer as the right or the wrong. And many of you may know this. This is sort of, it's a no-head whatever trick, but I'll play it nevertheless. So let's take a look at the images that's on the screen. Which one of these images is Kiki and which one is Buba? Can you all sort of make a quick check and decide which is Kiki and Buba? So hopefully all of you did that. Okay, so the rounded image here, is this Kiki? Raise your hands. Is it Buba? Raise your hands. Okay. So, and hopefully you did that also on your forum. So over 95% of people agree that the angular shape is Kiki, the round shape is Buba. And these are, of course, imaginary words that have some sort of suggestion that mean to us in some way. So shapes and sounds do correspond based on Ramachandran and Hubbard's reconstruction of this Berlin experiment from the old 1920s. And let's do another experiment. So in the 19th century, synesthesia, called at the time color hearing in English, audition colorée in French, Neuspruch in Russian, and Doppelempfindungen in German. So it became a subject of scientific study for the first time. So it was discovered in 1812. So psychologists and physiologists regularly ask synesthetes to report on the colors of the music of German composer Richard Wagner. He was the one composer who was most associated with synesthesia. And I will now play the beginning of Wagner's Prelude to Lohengrin, and I'll ask you to close your eyes and experience the music. What do you see or feel? And I'll ask you to jot down, so after you listen to it, I'll ask you to jot down your responses. So what colors do you see? What feelings do you experience? Okay, so let's do this. So take a minute to write something down. Anyone want to volunteer any experiences that you might have had or not had? Anyone? Yes?
It kind of made me feel calm and almost made me picture like a Disney.
The Disney movie at Calm. Anything else? Uh-huh.
Yeah, it felt like I was flying in the sky, so it's like light
Okay, so
blue,
flying.
plus clouds.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? One more, and then uh-huh.
Felt like kind of like light blue colors, but like kind of like a sea or something.
So sea and blue color, light blue, I imagine, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, one more. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, for me it felt like dawn, like a golden light over a green field or something.
Okay,
It's
good.
very, like,
Okay, so now we have it all. So I'm just going to go through the response of Charles Baudelaire to this piece. So he said, I felt myself released from the bonds of gravity. He felt brightness, intensity of light, and increase and incandescence of heat. So there is definitely golden light that is there. There is brightness. There is levitation. So this is what Baudelaire says. And he also said, he suggests that true music must evoke analogous ideas in different ways, and that it would be truly surprising to find that sound could not suggest color, that colors could not evoke the idea of a melody. So Baudelaire encouraged us to be synesthetic listeners and to attend to our senses. The same piece produced maybe not quite the same emotions, but in Kandinsky, who in his reminiscences in 1913, so he's a native speaker of Russian, he had already moved to Munich. He wrote his reminiscences in German, then later he translated them into Russian, and you can see the Russian below. He said about this piece, so the violence and the winds embodied the pre-nocturnal hour. I saw all my colors in my mind. They stood before my eyes. Wild, almost crazy lines were sketched in front of me. Wagner had painted my hours musically. And these sort of sketched wild lines, these are the form constants or the abstract images I was mentioning about earlier. So, so in addition to his translation from German into Russian, Kandinsky also had a synesthetic code. The cellos for him were deep blue, the violins evoked green, the flutes were light blue, and the trumpets were yellow. We then don't need an orchestra to hear Kandinsky's canvases, and you can see composition 8 on the screen. The music is encoded in the colors. The colors and the forms evoke sounds in his synesthetic translation. So my work on synesthesia began in the faraway 2006 with another artist, synesthete, the Russian mystical composer Alexander Scriabin. So Kandinsky had synesthesia. About Scriabin, it wasn't quite clear if he had it or not. Scriabin worked on an apocalyptic project intended to transfigure reality and unify the fragmented modern world through multisensory art. And this project began with his 1910 symphony Prometheus, the poem of fire for orchestra, chorus, piano, and color of electric lights, color organ of electric lights. And you can see the model for it in the screen. I took a picture at the in Moscow a long time ago. So, so this most enigmatic aspect of Prometheus, the color organ, was what motivated me in 2006 to make my first research trip to Russia to examine something else, the one score that Scriabin had. So he notated on the part for the light organ, but he also wrote on a late, like 2 years later, he hand wrote notes in Russian about what the different colors would mean, what the different intensities or effects of light would be. So, so you can see here, maybe you can't really see here, but you see pre-revolutionary Russian writing, which is very hard to understand. On the score itself, on the bottom, you can see instructions in Russian, German, and French. No English. So you need to be able to speak those languages, and if you work with Russian, you need to be able to figure out what he says. So, and here's sort of a better version of this. These correspondences here begin with C, which is simple red, красный простой, in the middle there is F sharp. So the red color for Scriabin was the spiritual color, no, the red color was the material color, the F sharp, the blue-violet color was the spiritual color. And he imagined this as a circle of color, of color tone, color tonality correspondences. This is what you see in the middle. And this idea that colors and tones correspond goes back to Isaac Newton, the person who discovered gravity, and you can see his version. I think this is on the right. And then another of the artists in my book, František Kupka, a Czech artist, Czech-French artist, also considered how he can create music with colors. So he also used this idea of the color wheel. So when I started looking at the autograph score, and again, like you can see here, like the various notations, again, I emphasize very hard to read, something struck me. So the ones that are in a box, it says Monia, then другая, синий, синоватый, красный. So a blue lighting bolt, and then a red, another one in red. So we have these two contradictory colors, the spiritual and the material, blue and red, and then we have these lighting bolts. I'm just like, what is happening with these lighting bolts? And the whole score is peppered with them. And you can also see on the score, which is also important, speaking of multilingual research, all the expression marks are in French. Plus animé, joyeux, you can figure out what these mean because they have correspondences in English. So animated, joyous, with enthusiasm. This is this part with enthusiasm. But most important, there are all these lightning bolts. So what do we do with them? So the recurring lightning bolts in the score of Scriabin gave me the idea, and of course the electric color organ gave me the idea of thinking about the connection between natural electricity in the thunderbolts in the score and the advance of electric illumination in late 19th century Russia. So you can see the spectacular electric illumination of Alexander III coronation in 1883 on the screen. After Russian scientist Pavel Yablachkov invented the first arc lamps, electric lamps, in 1876, electric light became known as Russian light, or Ruski Svet. And interestingly, in this image that you can see, this painting is actually really grandiose. You can see how electric light came to affirm Russian religious and imperial power. So, and I'm really getting to my conclusion here. So after reading Russian symbolist journals and philosophy from the period that exist only in Russian, I also realized that around 1900, spiritualists and mystics like Scriabin studied science to their own ends and believed that light, electricity, and heat are the physical manifestation of spiritual life. So it is spiritual love. So electricity would be the power that would transform the world. I'm saying I'm moving to my conclusion now. Now scholars argue, humanists and scientists, if Scriabin was really a synesthete. But have they actually looked at the score that I just showed you? Have they read the notebooks of Alexander Scriabin, where he talks about the tender lines of my caresses, the crags of my anger, the stars, lightning flashes of my gaze, which are, again, are like the stars of the form constant that I mentioned earlier. In Prometheus, he said he saw a combination of colors and zigzags, like Kandinsky, like tongues of flame. So in my Scriabin multilingual and multisensory case study gave me the idea for 3 projects: my synesthesia book, 3 articles on rational electricity that may also turn into a book, and then finally a book on Scriabin that will talk about the multimedia adaptations of his art after his death. So just in 2024, there were 2 performances of Prometheus with lights. This is the most recent one. I was in San Francisco on March 2nd, 2024. So you can see how the hall is immersed in red light. So this is the material color. This is before it starts, and then we see the spiritual blue-violet color during the performance or after, so reaching the spiritual dimension. And finally, going back to the Synesthesia Symposium, with which I started in Moscow 2019. So there I was not only a scholar presenting on synesthesia, I was also used as a simultaneous interpreter and a translator, because there was no one who actually knew. There were hired professional translators and interpreters. They didn't know the synesthesia terms in Russian and English. They didn't know the music terms in Russian and English. So I had to tell them, oh, what is double bass? The Russian guy asked me, and I was like, oh, double bass in Russian is contrabass, but he didn't know what double bass is. So I stepped in, and finally, as a courtesy to my colleagues, there was this beautiful. So I played a color violin, not a color organ, but the closest I got to it. There was an American presenter who brought her color violin with LED lights, but she didn't know any Russian music. So at the reception at the end, I asked her to pick up the violin and play a piece called Moscow Nights, very famous. And I'm not playing great because I hadn't practiced for probably a couple of months then, but I just couldn't resist. So here it is, and thank you. Oh, he does it. The waiters at the reception were really involved with singing. My highest achievement. Thank you.
Next from Dr. Esteban Gomez.
All right, can folks hear me back there? Okay, thank you again for the invitation. I really appreciate it. My name is Esteban Gomez. I'm a professor of anthropology here at the University of Denver. And today I'm going to talk about 3 different projects that I've done. One is I'm going to start off with my archaeological research in Central America, continue with some ethnographic work that I did here in the city of Denver, and then finish off with a film that I'm just recently completed and will be airing next week. So many of you may not know this. For those who know me, you may not be familiar with my archaeology background, but the first 15 years of my career were in archaeology. So I started off my research in Central America doing colonial period research. And one of the things I want to kind of focus on with all 3 of the different projects that I've worked on is to focus on marginalized histories, or basically histories that have been excluded from these larger national narratives. And one of the central things I want to do is kind of amplify those voices and those experiences with my research. At the same time, I also want to kind of talk about the different ways in which I've tried to disseminate that research to audiences outside of the academy. But yeah, so my first project or the first project I want to talk about was my archaeological research in Central America, in El Salvador, specifically in the Gulf of Fonseca, which is this Gulf area that's shared by El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. I worked on the island of Conchahuita, and it was inhabited by Lenca-speaking peoples at the time of the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century. When I first got to El Salvador, I got to chatting with a lot of folks out there, and they always asked me what I was doing in El Salvador. And I said, well, I'm an archaeologist, and their first assumption was that I was working that most of my research was focused on Western El Salvador. And the reason for this is, if you go to El Salvador, most of the quaint colonial towns and most of the indigenous peoples that you'll encounter in the country basically reside in the western part of the country. And that's also where you'll find major archaeological sites like Joya de Serén, or Chalchuapa, Tasumal. These are all major archaeological sites that you'll encounter in the West. When I tell them that I work in Eastern El Salvador, they're just kind of surprised. They're like, well, what's there in Eastern El Salvador? And I tell them, basically about the colonial history, and then I say, yeah, I'm working on these islands, and then they always kind of go like, gasp, like, what? We have islands? I'm like, yes, we have islands. So there's a lot to learn about there's a lot of, when thinking about marginalized histories, they didn't even know they had islands out there. But when you go to El Salvador, most of the indigenous communities, you'll find are in Western El Salvador. So in the departments of Ahuachapan, La Libertad, Santa Ana, Sonsonate. And the main reason for this is because this part of El Salvador was home to a number of cacao groves, and so at the time the Spanish arrived in the colonial period, cacao was kind of a form of currency, so they kind of allowed the indigenous communities over there to basically kind of reside in those communities, and they didn't force them out of their homes. In Eastern El Salvador, on the other hand, they had a very different colonial process. They had indigo plantations as well as cattle ranching, and these two practices basically displaced many of the indigenous communities in that part of the country. And so people in El Salvador generally thought that Eastern El Salvador was pretty empty. And if you look at census records from the 18th century, it's not a surprise to think of this landscape as being somewhat barren. But if you look at earlier colonial records in the 16th century, you'll see that this landscape was well populated. And even this census map that was taken in 1550 was 20 years after the area was raided for slaves that would eventually end up in South America. So it was a very well populated landscape. And so part of my research is trying to understand what happened in Eastern El Salvador, but also trying to disseminate this research to kind of a broad audience. And when thinking about this idea of multilingualism, when I first started doing my research in El Salvador, one of the priorities I had as a grad student was to publish first in Central America, specifically in El Salvador, in Spanish, so that people could have access to my research and to better understand the impacts of colonialism in El Salvador. So not only did I kind of publish locally in terms of my academic research, but I also did a number of presentations in schools, at different Rotary clubs, like just all over the country, just trying to kind of disseminate that research to a broad audience. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the different project, our second project here. This is my Denver, which is a project I started at Abraham Lincoln High School and also continued at North High School. When I continued it at North High School, actually, I collaborated with Zoe Tobier, who was in the writing program, and so we did a number of workshops at North High School. And some of the workshops were basically designed to understand how gentrification and rapid urban change were impacting high school students. And for both me and Zoe Tobier, it was really important to have DU students involved with the work because we wanted DU students to better understand what those impacts look like, but also to kind of share their experiences of what it means to be a college student to a high school student who doesn't know much about that experience. And so So one of the first things that we asked them to do was to do a mapping exercise of basically have them map their neighborhood and to see kind of what kinds of changes were taking place in their neighborhood. And immediately when we asked them to do this exercise, they said, well, which one? The one that we previously lived in, or the one that we've been, that we are now forced to move into? So, if you look at their maps, many of them were displaced in the last 10 years because of rapid urban gentrification, higher cost of living in the city of Denver, and so they now find themselves traveling 1 to 2 hours by bus just to get to high school. So for us, it was really important to kind of better understand how rapid urban change, gentrification was impacting, or was basically impacting these students on a day-to-day basis. So when I first started this project, Abraham Lincoln High School, one of the things that we asked the students to do was to do this kind of photo voice project to document their neighborhoods using photography. For this project, we asked them to create these short films to kind of highlight what that change looked like. And so we worked with them on their writing. We did a number of writing exercises with them. We helped them with the interviews with established residents in the area, just to get a kind of a generational, multi-generational view on the changes taking place in the neighborhoods. And basically kind of walk them through that process of creating these short form videos that, again, highlighted the changes taking place in their neighborhoods. One of the projects that that was kind of featured prominently in a lot of their works was the Central 70 project. This was basically the expansion of I-70. And in many ways, this had, when we think about the impacts of COVID on Denver, this had a kind of more debilitating impact on neighborhoods like Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville in northern Denver, mostly because of the road closures, the amount of pollution that was introduced with this project. And again, when you introduce projects like this, it generally impacts low-income communities as well as ethnic minority communities. This is one of the poems that was introduced by one of the students. Our toxic exhaust fumes feed into a pot of racism that's been stewing for nearly a century. Again, so one of the things that we wanted to introduce with this project was give the students an opportunity to kind of express how rapid urban change was impacting them on a daily basis, and be able to, again, understand how policies impact them. In addition to that, like another underlying goal was just to get them involved in just local politics, to see how they can make a change in their local environments. Okay. Ooh, I think I'm on pace here. So I'm going to end with my project, Snapshots of Confinement. This is a film that's going to be airing next week. It was a project that was initiated by Whitney Peterson, who was an MA thesis or MA graduate student here at Denver. So basically, we were able to make her thesis into a film. So I was joking earlier that this is now a requirement for all our MA students to make your thesis into a film, and so just kidding, by the way. So this was again not It basically happened in 2017. Trump had just won the election, and she was just very distraught, like, what do I do? And I'm like, let's make a film, and here we are. The film is focused on these photo albums that basically document, that were curated by these Japanese American families while they were incarcerated in the camps during World War II. For those who are not familiar with this history, during World War II, Japanese Americans were placed in these camps, or internment camps, specifically those Japanese Americans that lived in the western part of the country. And so there were 10 camps in total, and more than 125,000 people were placed in these camps. And the photo albums that were examined by Whitney Peterson for her thesis research were kind of focused on the camp experience at Manzanar and Amaji. Amaji is located in southeastern Colorado, and Manzanar is located in California. When telling this story, and one of the challenges when taking something from an academic context into more of a film context is a very kind of challenging endeavor, because you want to make sure that the research is kind of relatable, right? And so we knew for sure that myself and Whitney, we couldn't tell this story. Mostly because, again, our closeness to the project, but also it wasn't necessarily our story to tell. And so for us, it was really important to find someone to serve as kind of the lead subject for the film, that you can see the film through that person's eyes. So we ended up with Diana Sushita. She is the founder of the project called Tisaku. It's an oral history project that kind of focuses on the internment experiences, and like us, she was focused on these photographs about the internment experience, and so she became a kind of a logical choice to be serve as the lead subject for this film. But again, yes, that's just the North Star in this film are these photo albums, again, that we find that are housed at museums at Manzanar and Amachi. But also some of these photo albums that are featured in the film are still with the families, and so it required us going into the homes of these families to document these photo albums. But yeah, so one of the challenges of this film was how do you translate academic research into a film, right? That's not something I was ever trained to do. I had no idea how to do that. And so one of the things I did was take a screenwriting class. Like, it seems like something I probably need to do in order to better kind of, again, tell this story. And again, you'll see Zoe Tobier up there. She was one of the story producers for this film to kind of help me. She has a background in film, so she kind of helped me kind of put this story together. And then from there, basically, I was, one of the challenges was trying to, again, make sure that we could tell this story in a way that could be relatable to not only descendants of Japanese Americans, but also people outside of that, the Japanese American community. One of the cool aspects of this project were these archival documents. Diana Sushita, who is again the lead subject of this film, her grandfather was placed in Tule Lake. And for those who are familiar with this history or are not familiar with this history, Tule Lake was one of the camps that featured one of the camps that had a lot of internees who were kind of resisted the internment, and so they were all placed in Tule Lake, and so her grandfather was in Tule Lake. But her grandfather, Tamatsu Fushida, had 120 pages of governmental records that, on his, or governmental documents that kind of featured his behavior at the camps. And so one of the things that we tried to do is try to kind of highlight that documentary record as well as the photo albums, and try to, again, kind of provide a dynamic story, or a dynamic visual to kind of tell the story. But yeah, again, it was one of a really fun film to work on. We're going to be screening it this next Thursday, May 2nd at 5 p.m. We're going to have a reception between 5 and 6. And from 6 to 7, we'll have the film screening, and then we'll have a Q&A with myself, as well as with two of the film participants, Derek Okubo and Marsh Tanawaki. Again, what I provided here were 3 different projects that I worked on, and again, one of the main focus is to kind of talk about these marginalized histories, but also how do we kind of disseminate those histories to audiences outside of the academy, right? And so, again, I really want to stress this, especially for the students. Sometimes you have an idea of what you want to do when you graduate and go into grad school. Myself included, I thought I was going to be an archaeologist for my entire career. I was doing that for 15 years, and next thing you know, I'm now writing screenplays for films, and I had no idea I was going to do that. So I really want to emphasize that sometimes you have no idea what you're going to be doing. And so, myself, I kind of still think I'm trying to figure out what I'm really interested in. So just kind of want to leave you with that. So.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Dr. Abigail Kabandula.
Thank you, Camila, for the invitation, and thank you everyone for coming to listen to us. This is the first time I'm doing this, and it's exciting. I didn't know how much of a variation in terms of presentation we have today, and it's just tremendous work, and kudos to you guys for the work that you do. Just as a way of introduction, my work is mostly in human security and global governance, and I focus mostly on peacekeeping operations and special political missions at the multilateral level, so for the United Nations and the African Union. And one thing I'll say in this field is that there's a lot of acronyms and jargon, and if I just fall in that realm, you might want to raise your hand and say, what does that mean, just in case I forget. But I'll try my best to try and just not use a lot of jargon and acronyms. So I will talk about my research project that I'm working on right now, which is the Custodians of Peace. So just as a way of introduction and the outline of my presentation, I want to talk about what the Custodians of Peace project is about, and then talk about my field research and the different countries that I went to, and briefly just the data analysis, some of the techniques that I use to analyze my data in terms of coding and maybe transcriptions, and then I'll just highlight a summary of the findings, and then also some of the research outputs that I've had so far. So the Custodians of Peace, I have a question mark. It says Custodians of Peace just because I am interrogating the fact that are they really custodians of peace? And these are the United Nations and the African Union special envoys and diplomats and all those people that participate in conflict prevention. So the Custodians of Peace objective is to provide a theoretical and empirical explanation for the African Union, the United Nations, and other multilateral political missions that are engaged in conflict prevention and peacebuilding, and also just to provide some kind of an analysis of their efficacy. For the project, I have Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan, and I have four, sorry. Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan, sorry, as my case studies. And the reason why I have predominantly what you would call Horn of Africa regions, so countries that are mostly in East Africa but towards the Middle East, is because that's my area of specialization. I mostly do my research around Horn of Africa countries. But then Sudan, I wasn't able to go to Sudan, but so most of the case studies and some of the things that I'll talk about are centered around Ethiopia, Somalia, and South Sudan. I wanted to say also that this is a multi-year project that was sponsored by the United States Institute for Peace. So I did, it was a 2-year project, and I'll talk about a bit of the research in just a second. In terms of research methods, like a very good social scientist, I use qualitative research. I'm sure there are no sociologists here who claim that they're the real social scientists. So I use qualitative research methods, particularly in-depth interviews, key informant interviews with policy makers, policy analysts, senior to mid-level to senior and above. So I'm talking about your ambassadors, the special envoys, heads of departments. I did a total of 60 interviews over 2 summers. So the project started in 2022, spring, and then in the summer I did my first batch of interviews, and then in 2023, just as previous summer, I did my second batch of interviews. So a total of 60 interviews, and I also have formal informal meetings, chats, and all those kinds of things that you do, going for functions, attending meetings, workshops, just to make sure you get all the data that you can around the project you're working on. I also did diary keeping just because I was mostly using reflexivity just to check myself, how am I interpreting the information that I'm getting, what are my biases, and so that also was helping as I was writing out my day and thinking about the main themes, what was new, what was different, what was unexpected, or what did I have going in, so that was also very helpful. I also held and had an advisory group. This is a 15-member, so I have 5-member advisory group, but the meeting that I had in New York at the United Nations had 15 members that came from the United Nations, the African Union, and surrounding think tanks such as the International Peace Institute, and I can't remember some of them top of my head, but just surrounding think tanks that work at the United Nations. In terms of research participants, the idea was to get a broader view, not just from the United Nations and the African Union, but also to get a sense of other stakeholders that work in conflict prevention and peace building. So I included other multilateral organizations such as the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, COMESA, which is the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, NGOs. I had various NGOs, Red Cross, Red Crescent, and then I also had the opportunity to interview some government officials, like heads of department within the government. For instance, in the Ethiopian case, the Ministry of Peace. In Sudan, I met one of oh no, I shouldn't actually tell you who it was, sorry. I met some top senior official in the previous government that decided to resign in Europe, so yeah. And then other think tanks, I had Amani Africa, not yet on the picture. Amani Africa is a local think tank in Addis Ababa where the African Union has the headquarters, and also other United Nations departments and agencies. So I did organize a lot about putting pictures just because of ethical concerns, and also I didn't want to give out who participated in the research. So some of the pictures, I just have myself in there and the background of the institution. So this picture is from the African Union headquarters, and a particular department or commission now, the Political Affairs, Peace and Security Commission, PAPS Commission, just in front of it. It's very iconic, like almost everybody that deals with peace and security and goes to the African Union, they have that picture. And then in terms of my research context, I have talked about Ethiopia. Ethiopia because the African Union headquarters is there, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is there, and then several other agencies also have regional offices there. So it was much easier for me to be able to talk to these policymakers, policy advisors, and also policy analysts from there. I also traveled to Nigeria because ECOWAS headquarters is there. South Sudan, I was in Kenya, and of course the United States because the UN headquarters is here. Switzerland because I had an opportunity to go to a conference and a number of UN and AU people were there, so that was also an opportunity for me to do interviews. And in Zambia because the commercial headquarters is there. Just some pictures of some of the organizations I went to here. This, can I point? No. So in the middle, and that's one of the think tanks in Nigeria called Neopolls. They do opinion polls around conflict, peace and security, and governance. And then at the far left, that's a sign that you see when you're about to enter the United Nations mission in South Sudan. This is the peacekeeping mission, so basically a military base, so I really couldn't take some of my pictures there. So, and just a caveat as to why I also don't I'm not showing a lot of pictures, that I was almost arrested in Ethiopia for taking pictures of And then to my far right, that's the head of the Peace and Security, Political Affairs, Peace and Security Commission for ECOWAS, Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa, who has also visited Kobel before. So he's okay with me having his picture there and saying that I have native. One of the things that I enjoy about doing research is the food. We try to try different cuisines. So at my far left, that's a suya stand. Suya is like street food, street meat in Nigeria, so it's common in most of West Africa. And of course, injera and I think mostly vegetarian or meat. I'm not sure what I was eating injera with there. That's from Ethiopia. Moving on to what I did with my data and in terms of data analysis. So one of the first things that I did was to transcribe the data. So I had 60 interviews. Most of them I recorded them, and so just the thought of transcribing was extremely daunting. So I reached out to some of my friends who work in the tech industry. Like, what are you guys using for user experience research and all that? So like, oh yeah, we're using Otter AI. Is really, really good. I was like, okay, great. So I purchased Otter AI and I put my interviews there. I cleaned them a little bit and put them in there. My goodness, talking about language. So my participants are mostly multilingual, so they speak French, French and English as their maybe third or fourth language. And so the accents were very, very strong, especially with the interviews that I did in Nigeria. They had very strong accents, which meant that Otter AI did not understand most of the things that they were talking about. So the interviews that I did with predominantly British or American accents, they were okay. But I had a lot of work to do to clean up the interviews, particularly from West Africa. The ones that I did in Addis Ababa and Kenya were not too bad because the accents are a little bit lighter. So in terms of language and in terms of technology, Otter AI failed me. So I had to hire a research assistant to help me to try and clean up. So the job that I actually thought I was avoiding of having to listen and go through line by line, so my research assistant had to go through that, and she's still doing it. In terms of coding for themes, which we usually do when you do interviews, I also tried in vivo because I had learned in vivo when I was in school. It's like, okay, this is taking me long. We have evolved and there's so much technology out there. What else can I use? So again, I looked around and the most popular one was Atlas TI. So I use Atlas TI to code myself, and then I also use intentional coding for machine learning and all that. So that was great, and it was easier to use. And then I also use, I coded my notes from the diaries that I kept, and of course there's reflexivity in terms of how understanding and analyzing the data. And I can talk about some of these themes that I'm highlighting here in details in the Q&A, just because I don't have a lot of time. Just a summary of some of the key themes. So I had a total of 20 key themes that were coded, and each with varying themes of like 50 to 100. So within each one of these themes, there are like 50 to 100 other themes. And here is just a summary of all the themes, and what I was just trying to highlight here is perhaps the significance of resources in terms of deployment, functions of these missions that the UN, AU embark, and then in terms of the lessons learned, in terms of just contributing overall to conflict prevention and peace building. So this is basically a summary of the interviews and the themes that I found, and how like finances are such a cross-cutting theme across all these other major themes. Nonetheless, I argued that after the analysis and everything else that I've gone through for 2 years, I argued that based on my research results and the current geopolitical context, I contend that the UN, AU, and these regional economic communities, efforts in multilateral conflict prevention and peace building, particularly through political missions, are fraught with unpredictability from a highly fractionalized and competitive environment. They lack guarantees, suffer from internal divisions, and that political power struggles, competition for influence and recognition, and insufficient funding hinder the effectiveness of these missions. And subsequently, I unpack what this argument is referring to. For instance, I talk about fractionalized competition, how each one of the superpowers, for instance, the United States, Russia, China, compete to influence how these missions work, who the envoy should be, who they should be appointed as envoy, who will lead which mission. Those kinds of competition impact how the UN or the AU deploys in times of crisis, and how that mission itself unfolds, and how it works and functions, and also how they can influence some of the activities that these missions have. So that's basically what this argument was around. And of course, the resources were at the center of it. The resources, be it the human resources themselves, but also some of the weapons or equipment that they use in the mission. In terms of the research output, I was contacted by the International Peace Institute in New York to ask me to write something and publish a policy analysis, initially focusing on the women, peace, and security agenda. And what I did was compare the progress that the UN, the AU has made. So the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda is around Resolution 1325, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. So the resolution is around women in peace and security, and the idea is to empower women and to include women in these political processes, and particularly negotiation, mediation, and other political processes. And so Resolution 1325 was enacted in 2000, and so what they asked me to do is that from your research, is there anything that you can share? What is the progress? What is being done? So that's what this policy analysis that was published by IPI talks about. The gist of it is that there has been a lot of frameworks, there have been a lot of policies that have been instituted at the global, national, and regional level, and yet there's very little progress in seeing whether the women are actually participating. For instance, there are fewer women who are leading missions. There are fewer women who are participating in negotiations. There are fewer women that are included in terms of discussions at the table about issues that high politics issues within these countries. So that's what the policy brief concluded, that enough of policies, enough of frameworks, just act and implement. The other thing that I'm engaged with in terms of my output is another more detailed policy brief that will be published by the United States Institute for Peace over the summer. And this one will look at more political missions more broadly, the evolution and where they're at now and where they're going, and of course it will include policy recommendations. Later on over the summer, I'll be working on the overall book project since I'm done with my field research. All right, so I'll end here. Thank you so much for listening, and I welcome questions and comments.
So we're going to have the questions and discussion now. So if the three of you would like to sit there at the table, and I will ask people for questions. This is a small room, smaller than we've had last year. So if you talk really loud, everybody should be able to hear your question, and I will repeat it if, just to make sure everybody has heard it. So any questions at all, either about people's research methods, about writing for different audiences, about being a multilingual researcher, or just anything at all that interested you or that you would like feedback from these speakers towards projects you're going to be doing. And you can either ask one of our presenters or ask a more general question that maybe several people can speak to. So who would like to go first? Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Demova. Do you think, because Wagner was in the Romantic period, do you think that style of music kind of opened up more space for synesthesia to take place, or less?
Absolutely, yeah. And before the scientific discovery of synesthesia, it was the Romantic that started playing with ideas of sort of blending the senses. There was a blind man who actually hears the light. That's sort of an Eichendorff poem that describes this sort of synesthesia before synesthesia was discovered. And chances are, because it's an actual, it's a trait that some people have. About probably 5% of people have some sort of synesthesia. So it was something that people experienced, but they didn't notice it before the scientists sort of looked into it. But the Romantics definitely gave it a push. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Somebody else? Now that one question has been asked, I know people will have many questions. Yes.
This is for Dr. Gomez, but if you can speak to it. I was thinking about the wonderful conversation you had about the three sort of projects, but also the three very different writing and research situations, especially the contrast between publishing locally in El Salvador and then making a film. These are huge differences. You spoke to it a lot already, but please tell me more. What are some of the interesting sort of challenges you saw, or some things that pop up, especially in writing a screenplay or something like that, which is very different from publishing your archaeological work in the region in which you're doing the work. So I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll kind of take it, I'll focus on the archaeology part first. Writing anthropology in the US is very different from writing anthropology in Latin America, so that's just a very different, distinct style. So in the US, it's a little bit more reflexive, you have a little bit more theory involved with your research, but in Latin America, it's more science-based writing. So not only am I, having to write in a different language, but I also have to write in a format that's a little bit more scientific than I'm used to. And so that was in itself a challenge. How to, make my, how to not only make my research accessible, but also write in a format that is suitable for that environment, I guess, right? So for the sciences. And then I think in terms of, progressing from there, I think I previously taught at Colorado College, and I was doing archaeology down there, and at some point in my career I said, well, what am I doing? Like, who's reading my work, And so, and how is my work impacting the broader audience? And at that point, I was like, I feel like I need to do something different. And so that's how I ended up doing ethnography, urban ethnography in Denver. And then from there, I just really wanted to experiment with different writing styles, writing techniques, methodological approaches. When I first went into grad school, I was debating between UC Riverside and UC Berkeley, and Riverside, I asked one of my future advisor about, which program I should go into, or what were some of the benefits, and what were some of the benefits behind each program. And she said, well, if you want to be a really good archaeologist, go to UC Riverside. But if you want to be a really good anthropologist, come to Berkeley. And so I think that was really sound advice, because I think what really has been very influential is learning methods and techniques outside of archaeology. And I think one of the things that anthropology kind of really tries to do is try to kind of make sure that you stay within that subfield. I just wanted to really explore what was outside of that subfield and explore different writing techniques. So So yeah, it's a constant process of learning different techniques, not only in terms of methods, but also writing techniques that, yeah, I'm very grateful that my department is very patient with me. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. So, other questions? Yes?
This is kind of for everybody, but like being a language like major kind of also brings a new like perspective on translation. And so like how is translation like a big piece of like what you want to do? Like within your articles, like are you with like making them in for Demova, like Russian, French, and English, like, or I don't know, like what is the translation impact for all of you guys?
All right, I'll give it a try. Mostly from collecting data, for me it's been a big challenge just because in some countries that I go to, they don't speak English, and my strongest language outside my country, I speak 7 languages from my country, but I'm also from Africa, there are like over 1,000 languages. And so it's getting people to be able to do research that is build the relationship and assures the respondent that you understand and you're following what they're saying and you're interested. It just gets lost in translation when you have a translator there. I had a field research assistant in Nigeria, and we had the complete opposite personalities. I'm calm, and I want to take time, I want to make my respondent comfortable. She's like, go, 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 go. Like, so you gotta calm down. I'm just telling them, to speak quickly, I don't want them to feel that. So it does have an impact in, at least in data collection, what I've experienced, it does have an impact in the sense that I might not do the research as well as the translator because of just different techniques and understanding of the project. And besides, they're not invested in the project. I'm the one who's invested in the project. So they want to get done and they want to be paid. And sometimes when you employ a research assistant, they're paid by hour. So the more interviews you do and the more time you spend in the field, the more they get paid. And so they're just those nuances that, yeah, come into play.
So what I can say about translations, it's very important for me, obviously, and sometimes, as I said, I need to do the translations myself because they don't exist. So sometimes it's uncovering texts that don't exist beyond like my field of study. So I need to read Russian, the Russian of a text that hasn't been translated, the German. So for instance, for Russian and German, there were case studies and articles on synesthesia from the late 19th century that are not translated. They're not in English, they're not in any other language. So I'm the only person, well, I'm not the only person who can read them, but only a person with this knowledge can actually access these texts. But it's also another interesting, it just occurred to me, another interesting problem with translation is that when you're publishing your book and you've written 140,000 words and then they tell you that your book needs to be 95,000 words only, and then you need to cut 40,000 and more words, you're basically told you need to cut all the originals. So basically you need to keep only like the most important words that really make a difference. And of course, as a literature scholar, you also saw from my presentation, I just like focused on this one word, and out of it, 3 book projects come out, which is sort of very strange. But again, like I need to find these words that are really important and emphasize them. And finally, in terms of synesthesia, so I don't think I mentioned it, but it's not only that people, let's say, see the letter A or hear the pitch A as red. It's always like burgundy red with like silver lining. So it's very nuanced. And if you don't have this nuance, like you lose this nuance. I mean, I showed you this color wheel that someone on the internet, not me, did, but like that person hadn't necessarily looked at the score, hadn't seen. So I mean, there are several versions of this this color wheel that I showed you from the score. That person doesn't know. He doesn't know what the nuances are, but the nuances are exactly what is so important for synesthetes, is their sort of personal experience, and it's also so synesthetes Or synesthesia is sort of a manifestation of neurodiversity. So I've had students with ADHD or are on the autism spectrum who have synesthesia, so these are related. And it's very important for those people to actually like have these nuances. So if you don't have access to the nuances of the language, you're lost. So yeah, these are my three sort of takeaways, or what I think in terms of translation and my research.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I mentioned my research in El Salvador was colonial period research, so that involved reading a lot of archival documents from the 16th century, and I just, being a Spanish speaker and reading that, I thought that, yeah, sure, I could do that easy. No, it was, yeah, just to give you an example, there was one excerpt I was reading from a document from the 16th century, and I had myself, my advisor, a historian, and someone who teaches or who taught in Spanish all read it, and we all came with different interpretations of the text. It was just, yeah, no one could agree. My advisor was arguing with the Spanish professor. It was a bad scene. And so, yeah, I thought it would be straightforward, and like it was not straightforward. And so yeah, there's a lot of nuances, and you have to be familiar with that era, right? And also understand 16th century epigraphy, abbreviations. It's just, yeah, I was very naive, and I did not anticipate having so many problems with it. So.
Can I just add something small? There's also an aspect of losing the effect or the meaning of something once you think about it in a different language and you're saying it. So I noticed that a lot when I'm doing research, because especially for non-English speakers or English speakers who have like English as a third language, because they think about something in their language and they want to express it to you, but then they tell you and they'll go like, okay, it's not exactly what I mean, but it's something close. But then as a researcher, you're wondering, what is that the exact thing? And you want to uncover the exact, it's just like, I understand myself just because I also get some frustration, like there's certain phrases that I am thinking about, but I cannot, there's no direct translation in English, and so that creates like kind of a frustration. I could see that frustration when I was interviewing people that did not speak English very well. Like they want to say something, like tell me, like they convey the significance of something, but they weren't just able to. I could sympathize with them.
Can you think of an example of something that's really untranslatable into English with that in your experience?
Oh, there are many, but I have one. Like there's a word, for instance, like in my native language, which is Kaunde, if I say, for instance, Shakapanga, it means the glorious creator of heaven and earth, but in English, just the creator. That's not what I meant. Like, but if I didn't know how to speak English, you can see how I would struggle to like express that to you. Yeah.
All right, wonderful.
Can I also say something? I'm so sorry. I think I have to ask you a question. So Milan Kundera has like a really nice article. I think it's on a certain sort of nostalgia. So the sky is the Russian word that Nabokov talks about. It's melancholy and nostalgia, and it's not clear what it is exactly. And I don't remember what the Czech word is. So maybe you know, maybe you don't. If you don't, it's okay.
For melancholy.
For melancholy. Anyway.
Litost?
Maybe.
Yeah, litost, it's kind of a word that you're feeling sorry for yourself, like you're self-pitying, and he's critiquing this concept of being self-pitying, but the way that you said it in English, it comes across different connotation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just saw that I deleted a sentence from my presentation, which is translation of experience into language or one language into another language possible at all? But I got rid of that, so it's always about like these gains and losses that happen in translation.
Yes, yeah, that's true. All right. Wonderful question. So, other questions about any aspect of research, writing? Yes.
How has being multilingual and having this multicultural perspective influenced the way you conduct research?
has being multilingual affected your research? Start?
I can go because I deal with that almost every day. It impacts and affects my research at many levels because I have to sort of perform culture and language. My English or French are not like my first language. And so, for instance, if I am working, I'm presenting at the UN in New York, I will dress differently. I will try and speak English very different, like more polished, not as relaxed. I am like, pronouncing every word that it should be, and I'll be slower, for instance. If I am at the United Nations, at the African Union headquarters in Addis, I'll be more relaxed, and the accent will be okay. My dress code is fine. I can also put on like African attire. Nobody's going to raise eyebrows. My hair will be in a certain way. So there's many cultural understanding that I've learned over the years because of doing this. And I've learned, like Judith Butler says, to perform them. So I perform them, like most of us do perform life as we go through it. So I perform according to the cultural context and what is expected of me. If I'm in New York, I'm in Addis, or if I'm in Abuja, or if I'm in my own country. So, or if I'm teaching also, I teach very different, so which is also another different culture. So you learn over the years what applies and what makes sense and what will push your agenda and your research in terms of the audience and the impact you want to have with the audience. I hope that helps.
So I just wanted to say that culture, and I've been thinking about mentioning the cultural aspect, is so important because we talk about multilingualism, but not knowing the culture, even if you speak the language, it's bad. You're not gonna make it. I have a funny anecdote that I was thinking at one point I will mention. So when I started doing research at the Scriabin Museum in Moscow, I had to perform. I had to perform a lot in terms of. I basically had an interview, so the bureaucracy in Russian is horrible, and you need to be very tenacious to be able to even withstand. Then, so that I can get to that score and even make photocopies of it, they didn't want to let me do that. So basically I had 3 examiners who were asking me questions and bombarding me with questions, and I had to basically do all the name dropping of both American and Russian scholars. So that was in 2006 and then in 2012 again, to be allowed to do the sort of work. One wonderful woman actually tried to do, so I was not allowed to make a photocopy of the whole score. I found it later on in a different place. I was not allowed to, but this woman really wanted to help me, so she was making all these copies, and then she got yelled at and kicked out, why are you doing this for her? Another, so he was a sound engineer. He said oh, why don't you come to me? And he showed me 4 different performances of Prometheus with Lights. So the first time when I saw Prometheus with Lights in person was this March, what I showed you in the picture. So he said, come to me, I'll show you. So he showed me, and then he said, I'll make a recording for you, but I'm not allowed to. So it was a lot of sort of speaking, convincing people, and sort of being ingratiating people, and they're all very sweet, but within the Russian bureaucracy, it's almost Soviet, and continues to be almost Soviet at this point. So you have to know how to work the system somehow to get all the information. So culture is essential there.
Yeah, in terms of my research in El Salvador, my parents are from Mexico, and going down there, I thought I would be able to kind of connect with the locals and local Salvadorans really well. But I was advised early on to not mention the fact that my parents were from Mexico, and to present myself as more American, and to also tell them that I was not an affiliate with the Salvadoran administration. And so So basically, it was to my advantage to be kind of a bumbling gringo down there and to be seen as such. Yeah, so I think it was helpful knowing, being able to, speak Spanish, although Salvadoran dialect is very different from the Mexican dialect, so I had to learn that. But there's a lot of tension between Central Americans and Mexicans, and so I wasn't anticipating that in terms of that being having experiencing. I didn't experience the tension, but being kind of mindful of that. But in terms of just thinking about my multilingualism, and I think it was certainly advantageous in El Salvador in that case, but also I have another film project that I'm working on about the immigrant experience here in Denver, and I work with a lot of different people who are from Central America. So having that experience of working in Central America and being able to communicate with them, and develop a sense of empathy with those community members. Like it's, I think I really valued my time in Central America and understanding, different aspects of that relationship, and just not taking advantage of it. Yeah.
Okay, so we possibly have time for one more question. We just have a couple of minutes left. Would somebody like to ask a final question? Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Gomez. I know you said you worked with kids in Denver and stuff like that. Have you also attempted to engage in the policy making process through that, I guess, in terms of seeing change in that respect?
Yeah, so I work with the neighborhood plan division for the city of Denver. So I was asked by City Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval to kind of work on that. And so I meet with them every 2 to 3 months to kind of go over different policies and also go over different plans for specific neighborhoods. And and the reason why she asked me to participate in that is because of my work at Denver. I'm not sure how she got word of it, but she and another councilwoman asked me to kind of participate and to be involved in those conversations. And ideally after this project, the film project is completed, I'd like to kind of continue my work at the high schools and to, again, kind of share some things that I've learned working at the city.
Okay, so we're formally out of time, but if you want to ask more questions informally or get more tacos, then please do. And thank you very much for coming today.